everyone? Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good evening and welcome to the flagship show. No, Daniel this week, he is at a real life job awards thing. I don't know if he's going to win an award. If he doesn't, he might not be allowed back on the show. We'll see how he gets on. But, you know, as always, I'm never alone. I do have an amazing guest, someone who's been on a few times before. And because it's Dynasty startup season, I couldn't think of anyone better to have on than my very good friend, author of the Analytics of Dynasty. He's contributor of Football Guys and host of the Analytics of Dynasty podcast, Jordan McNamara. Welcome back. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's good to be here. And you know, you said it was. I'm usually recording at night. It's like middle of the daytime, sun's out, so it's the cross ocean conversations are always nice.
Yeah, I mean, you get to do them in the day. I mean, it's helpful for some guests. It does mean there's some guests I can't get, and it also means I can't return the favor too often. And people go, "Oh yeah, can you come on our pod? It's on at like 3 a.m. your time." I'm like, "No, I'm sleeping."
Right.
But it does help for things like the podathon when everyone else is sleeping. We can get up at like 7 a.m. and record, so it all works. So swings and roundabouts to it, but I'm glad you enjoy it. But what's been going on? You haven't been on for a while. I think we got you on last May. You've obviously released a new version of the book, which is amazing. Tell us what's been going on and tell us about the Analytics of Dynasty 2022.
Yeah, so Analytics of Dynasty 2022 edition's out, and this is going to be, it's a little bit different, and each one's different in terms of some of the coverage that we do. This one, you know, this is the fourth one, so we did have some stuff that I thought warranted going back to, in terms of you know, just giving kind of a recap of where we are. So we spent the beginning part of the book doing that. You know, with a lot of stuff that we've learned along the way, right? If you're brand new to Dynasty, if you're brand new to the Analytics of Dynasty, it'll sort of get you up to speed. If you've been reading through them all, it'll kind of be a refresher. So that was kind of a fun concept that we did. And a lot of the other things that we did too was a ton of work on quarterbacks this time. It's some optimization of rookie drafts as well. And then I did a whole bunch of team building stuff, which isn't something I had typically done before, in terms of talking about some different stuff that I've done with my team builds. I wrote a chapter called the Confessions of a Recovering Productive Struggler. So if you're familiar with the concept of the productive struggle, I fell victim to that for almost a decade. And I'm recovering. I'm in recovery from that. And I wrote about that and some of the mistakes that people make in that process. Listen, I a lot of times see the Analytics of Dynasty through the lens of here's mistakes that I've made and that I'm not going to let you make. And being in on a productive struggle is basically that, which is, I think, a lot of mistakes that I've made through that process that I've learned from. We've got good data to suggest was wrong. And here's kind of showing you different ways to do it. So that's really it this year. And I think the team building aspect of this AOD is different than maybe anything we've done before. And it's really, really was a lot of fun.
And they're amazing. You can buy the previous copies, and I do recommend if you got the opportunity to do so. And you also released a rebuild guide as well, which is also really useful. So if you've actually never read any of Jordan's work before, the 2022 guide comes with a bundle with the rebuilding guide. I think it's like $10 more, which is just like a no-brainer, really. It's just like you have to get it, because I find that there's a lot of people, and I'm speaking more for the UK here. So Dynasty's on this huge boom here in the UK. I'd argue it's probably amongst serial players more popular than redraft. I wouldn't say as a whole, but I mean in terms of like general players. My Twitter timeline right now is filled with people doing startup drafts, and I'm resisting the urge because I've got too many.
You and me both.
Yeah, and I'm just resisting the urge, so it's just not going to happen unless an amazing opportunity comes. I always say, there's an amazing opportunity to jump in a league with like Matthew Berry and someone, I'll jump at that. But unless that happens, no. But the Dynasty game here, I think, is in 2 states, very popular, but also very junior compared to the US game. Because in the US, people have been playing Dynasty for a decade, 15 years plus. It's not that new a concept, but if it's over here, it's still quite a junior concept. And in a lot of leagues, it's still, people don't really know how to fashion a Dynasty league. I think a couple of years ago, I was trying to engage with people, and so yeah, I play, and I end up playing in about 40 Dynasty leagues, which is silly. And I've left a load of those because they're effectively glorified redraft leagues, where you just don't bother having an actual draft every year. You just do a rookie draft. But effectively, the league is dead from February till maybe April. And then you get a flurry of activity around the rookie draft. Then you do the rookie draft, and then it's dead again until like August, which isn't optimal. So I guess really, we'll get onto this in a second, but just like to set the scene here in the UK, what are some of the things that for Dynasty players who are looking to really take a step up and be in sort of more serious leagues, what is the AOD going to give them from a strategy perspective, but just some tips as well in terms of why they should go out there and buy the book, so that it will give them a bit of extra nous and clout in their leagues?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the big thing with AOD, there's a lot of things that we don't know, right? There's a lot of things that like we can't necessarily expect, right? Like, expecting a huge breakout from Cooper Kupp, like to the extent that it happened, right? There wasn't like, there was some indicators there that maybe he was better than he had performed throughout his career, but there was really nothing to sort of suggest he was going to be that good, right? So there's stuff that you can't necessarily project, right? There's stuff that you can't necessarily expect in terms of huge outcomes like that. But I think there's a lot of things you can do that really minimize your mistakes, which I think is a great place to start. I mean, that's just not making bad decisions is a great way to sort of increase your dynasty team, right? Not taking the wrong bets. Taking day 2 or day 3 wide receivers is historically a really bad bet at their cost in rookie drafts, for example. So understanding those, one of the things right now, like with this stuff for quarterbacks in particular, I mean, I think AOD in terms of quarterback study, like we kind of know what to shoot at. And, in terms of like, hey, here are the profiles that you take. Here are the profiles you don't take. Here are the profiles like at cost. It's kind of up in the air about what you take, right? And just by doing that, you avoid huge mistakes. We said last year that Trevor Lawrence at his cost was a horrendous investment, right? And I think that some of the transitions that we made, right? We went from Trevor Lawrence to Kirk Cousins plus, right? Which was a huge. I mean, I did a deal like that totally reshaped a dynasty team, and I ended up leading the league in points with that. And I'm still haven't made all the picks that I got from that deal, So you start doing those things and understanding just, hey, here's the mistakes that you don't make. And just a lot of it is that, right? And then, once you're sort of just eliminating some of the waste, then you can take a step up. The other thing too is I think generally as I get playing more, elite players matter so much, right? Elite players, when you look at it, right? Elite players, the difference between running back, the running back, 15 and running back 25 in terms of ADP about what you would expect from them isn't that much different. Same thing with wide receiver. If you can make a jump from wide receiver, 15 to wide receiver 5, right? That's a big deal, right? Those are big deals. Quarterback in particular, right? The elites at quarterback. I've really changed around my strategy in that way. Right? A lot of times before this AOD, I was very, hey, I can take a lot of quarterbacks like in the teens. I sort of know what to shoot at. And that's true. The problem is they don't change your world. They sort of act as a floor mechanism, whereas guys like Allen and Mahomes and the guys up at the top, right, they're ceiling raisers, which really sort of the more we shoot at it, the more we want those guys, because they make such a big difference and can make up for so many weaknesses other places. doing a lot of those things, right? Getting elite players at the cost of non-elite players, like even though it might make you feel uncomfortable, like that stuff really matters. And that's one of the big things, so those two things in particular, knowing what to avoid and being willing to go at the, with the sound strategy. It's tough to break it down in a 3-minute thing here.
No, of
but with a
course.
sound strategy to sort of really build elite players, to go after elite players. And I have a whole hierarchy of assets that'll sort of help you do that in the book, about how to make those trades, how to think about those trades, and really your team build to make it elite.
And that's why it's so powerful, because it's not going to teach you anything groundbreaking, in the sense of, it's not going to sit there and go, you've been doing it wrong the whole time. It's, as you say, it's marginal gains. It's just getting you to think differently, and just thinking about how to construct a team. Because I tend to find that most people, when they go into a dynasty draft, they tend to go about it one of two ways. I'm going to go in a win now, or I'm going to just stockpile a load of young talent and hope it comes good. The problem with shoehorning into either of those strategies is you're either going to pay over the odds for elite talent, which could work, but you'll be very fringe heavy. And if any of your elite players go down, you're done, and your window is short. Or you're the other way, where you're taking bets on lots of young players who aren't complete, and therefore you're as likely to miss on them as frequently as you're likely to hit on them.
Right.
And I think it's about, instead of shoehorning into a strategy, it's the same way we talk about in a redraft strategy, where people go, well, I'm going to go RB early, or I'm going to go 0 RB. Like, why shoehorn into a strategy? Look at the board, see how it breaks down. But as you say, collecting elite players, but just thinking about where the value is all the time. It's about value. And if you can find, there's always an edge in a draft. If you can find it, you're going to come out of it pretty happy. And it's uncomfortable. I've followed the advice in your book in a couple of drafts and done things that I've gone, I just don't like. I feel like I'm too wide receiver heavy, or I feel like I'm lopsided in a position. And then everyone starts to hit. You've got tradable pieces. You can then construct your team how you need to. And in a rebuild, that's really important, is people get scared to trade off for Josh Allen. But if you can get 3 elite players for Josh Allen, which is possible, it's uncomfortable, but for the long run, about scoring more points, it will help you. So a lot of great concepts in it. I think that's why I love it every year. I buy it every year. I urge people to buy it every year because it's great. And the team building guide you can get with it, it's amazing. We'll talk more about it in a minute, but I want to get into, because it's startup season. And I've talked about this just now in terms of people doing startups, and they do startups for startup's sake. And that's what's happening. People are like, I miss drafting. I've not drafted for 6 months. I can draft. Loads of leagues get started. Most of them are full of people that get very excited, but actually all they want to do is draft. They're not really fussed about playing in a dynasty league. And then you get these sort of inactive leagues. How can dynasty commissioners, what are some things that dynasty commissioners can do to keep the leagues engaged and fun? Because I tend to find there's a lot of dynasty leagues, but there's not a lot of great dynasty leagues. Unless they're like your home league with all your sort of original people. There aren't tons of great elite leagues that are just fun that you're like, I need to go in there because it's all popping off and it's what I want to be part of. So yeah, what's some advice for people who either are thinking of starting or have just started a startup league from a commissioner side, to where they can make it a more engaging experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think to decide, good formats matter, right? Formats that are fun. I tend to think formats that give a variety of positions values, right? So playing tight end premium, playing super flex, those things make life more interesting. So you get you get more trades, right? You get more offers going around because people need quarterbacks or people need tight ends, or you might value tight end differently than other people, right? So that makes, I think that's a huge thing, right? Involve a lot of positions, make more players relevant, right? Go try a 2 tight end league, right? Try a mandatory start 2 quarterback league, right? Do those things. and it'll make you have to look at other players more intently, right? So that would be mix up the formats in terms of making more players relevant. I think is a great way to keep it active. Try and figure out who you're involving yourself with, right? If you're playing, if you want to start a dynasty league with a bunch of people that don't pay attention in your redraft league, then that's probably not a great place to start, so finding some other people, whether that's through your community or online, there's sites that offer commissioner services as well, so you can go do that. I like those because at least I know my league is safe, right? But it's not going to go anywhere. The other thing I would always make mention of is if you're putting money in, make sure you know where it's going, right? Don't and I know there was been issues with people having PayPal, money in PayPal, money in Venmo and stuff like that, where it was actually seized by PayPal. So don't, make sure you're not doing that. Make sure your commissioner, I had a commissioner run away with over $1,000 in funds one time, just up and ignored us, took the cash. So make sure you're not in those situations, right? So all those things are important. And then, but try and find something you'd find fun format wise, right? And I think that's a big deal, right? I play a lot of super flex. I play tight end premium because I think I have edges there, and that's really fun to me, right? Having an edge, just hammering everyone with it is fun, right? Some other people don't like that, right? Some other people want to try new things. I don't. I just want to sort of know that I've got something that works and just hammer it, right? That's fun to me. So, finding what's interesting to you, and then, and trying to, and so, for example, and another way to keep it active, right? If you're struggling with activity, is just send around offers to everyone in your league, right? Just do that, right? And then, if they respond and don't respond to anything, right? One of my favorite techniques is if they just reject, I just respond with a quick email that says open to account or period send, and then you'd be surprised at some of the stuff that has come from that. And so just trying that, fostering communication and not necessarily being in people's face about it, but, don't let them just sit there and reject your trade and not answer, right? That's a technique that I use that's helped me get deals done.
Yeah. I mean, you make a great point about the money aspect of things. We had a big thing here in the UK. There was a guy who had 4,000 odd followers, and he was basically taking money from people. Estimated loss probably about 20 grand pounds he got away with, running hundreds of leagues, and basically it basically turned into a Ponzi scheme.
Was that this week? Was that real recently?
No, so that one I'm about to come on to. But this happened all through last year, where basically this guy was running leagues. It was like a Ponzi scheme. Basically, he wasn't paying out, and if he did pay out some leagues, he was starting other leagues and collecting money.
Yeah,
and he was BSing people for months about, PayPal, and people were paying direct into his bank account and all those sort of things. And then, this week was with Huss of Sleeper Wire. Now, this guy was Sleeper approved. I know Huss, and I've spoken to Huss, and I'm deeply disappointed and saddened because he's never struck me as that sort of individual. Now, I've never played in any of his leagues, so I'm not a victim here. And prizes were paid out, but it was the money that was supposed to go to charity, and it hasn't been. People were saying, look, the prizes have been paid out, but where's the money for charity? Just show us the receipts, show us where this has gone. Even a charity league, I run a charity league. I know loads of good people. Jack, who's watching, he runs a charity league. We have a charity donation page, and literally people go on there and they donate, and that's how it works. We don't touch the money. The only donation I took last year from our charity league was someone who couldn't pay through that account. They were international. They struggled. I think they're in South America. He's like, man, I'm trying to pay through this, but it's just too awkward. So he PayPal'd me, and then I paid it in his name. And it was like $20, I think it was. It wasn't but it was one person. I was like, well, that's a different circumstance. It's fine. And he got a receipt, and I proved it, and it wasn't a problem.
Right.
But that's what I mean. Like, there's no need. You've got so many vehicles now, safe leagues, tons of vehicles where you could just pay into leagues. Yes, you've got to pay a 70-cent transaction fee, but you know what? I'll pay that for the security, knowing it's there. So that's a big one. But Huss, I mean, even if it's a charity league, just make sure that that's all going to a valid and verified place. It's so important because nothing will break a league more and cause you more aggro. Because even if the money's not that big, you're paying for like $20 stakes or whatever.
Right.
It's the principle of the matter. That's what gets up people. And you could have a great league and that will tear it apart. And people will take sides. Some will be on the commissioner's side. Some will be on your side. It's a quick way to it to burn. And I'd also say on terms of things to keep it exciting, as you mentioned, trade offers are great. But I generally find, especially if here in the UK, because you're playing with a lot of people you don't know, as you'll probably never meet them in person. I always tend to do silly little games or conversation starters and things in there. So it'll be like, write 2 facts and 1 lie. People have to guess the lie about you. And you'll learn so much. And it's just little things like that, little chats about free agency when that happens. Serious breaking news. Not every piece of breaking news so-and-so's injured, but like if there's a big piece of breaking news, talk about it, get the community going. I always find they make the leagues more engaging, because when it becomes not just the game and it becomes about just chatting with people, that's what engages you. Like that's what you do. It's fun.
Yeah.
And if you're getting into conversations that are interesting and funny and humorous, and you get people doing like fake videos, fake press conferences, those sorts of things, all that sort of stuff, I think is great. Like I love that sort of stuff. That's the stuff that will keep me in leagues for years. Is the banter and the winding up, as say, when you drop, like you get people to bite on fake news and stuff like that. Like I love that sort of stuff. Like people draw up like fake newspaper articles and stuff. Like that's the sort of stuff I'm here for, honestly.
Right.
And memes and challenges. But yeah, let's go on. I got a good question here from Jack, and he said, "I've got a 20-man dynasty league that's being converted into a dynasty best ball. Best way to go about this with trades and waivers, etc."
Yeah, so I think the question about best ball becomes is what's your definition of best ball? You know, I think some best ball leagues will have it so that way you can make no in-season transactions. Some of them have it so that way you make transactions, you don't set a lineup. So I think understanding the difference between what is happening is really important in the context of that question. So that would be, at my initial salvo is really to study that, right? Because if you can't set lineups, if you can't make any roster decisions, right, and you're playing, super flex or something like that, right, having an extra quarterback makes a huge difference, right? If you can make roster moves, just not starting lineup moves, right? And someone gets hurt, right? You can address it via free agency. You could address it via the wire. You could address it via trade. You can figure out solutions to your problem. So understanding the difference there, I think, makes a lot of, right? That's a critical thing to know. And so, structuring your team around that, right? The other thing too is I think in best ball, one of my big strategies is that you take a lot more running backs than you do wide receivers, and people don't necessarily do that in Dynasty. I actually think in best ball, I would lean a little bit the other way. Not entirely. I'd basically make one shift, which would be I would pay up at for another elite running back or a higher end running back at the cost of a wide receiver. Typically, I usually go wide receiver early and startup drafts. Typically, I will go away from that, by maybe one, right? And then maybe instead of being, having more running backs than wide receiver by like a 2-to-1 margin, I'll play a little bit closer to even, right? Because the variance at wide receiver, you can extract a little bit more from it, best ball. So those would be a couple of things that I'd look to do via, trades, waivers, and roster construction.
Love that. I've got a dynasty best ball league. It's the only dynasty best ball league I have. And the way that it's commissioned is once a week transactions out of season. So it's like on a Wednesday or Thursday or something like that. So you can't flood the waiver wire once a week. And then when it gets to in season, it's every 4 weeks.
Okay.
Well, it's week 4, week 5, week 10. No, week 5, week 9. And then the last one is week 14, end of week 14. So you get 3 opportunities in season to make roster ads, which is done off Fab. because it encourages trading. So
Sure.
the idea is then still trading is your main element. It means that if you're smart and you stack your roster with talent, but maybe you're not going anywhere, you can sell these pieces for premium to try and contend. Inversely, if you're someone who is trying to play for next season, it's giving you an opportunity to kind of leverage that ability to acquire a lot more picks to help you get back up into the ranks. So it affords a lot more like equality in that sense if you've got smart traders in there, because you could have a really bad roster, but because there's not that many open free agency periods, you can acquire a load of picks and a load of young talent and get yourself back into contention within a year or 2 years, as opposed to the standard maybe 3 or 4 year model. Because it's
we don't believe in that 3 or 4 year model. Like your rebuild shouldn't take. Yeah, your rebuild shouldn't take that long. You know what I mean? They just shouldn't. And so yeah, no, I like the sort of expedited version that you present for sure.
Yeah, it's always better that way. Try and get back in 1 year, run it back in 1 year, do the Bruce Arians reload style, as we would say.
Yes.
Since it is sort of startup season, let's talk about some startup strategy.
Yeah.
And the thing I love about your books is because strategy changes every single year, because as you say, we learn more, but also the players change. You know, if we were talking 3-4 years ago, there was this plethora of running backs talent that is now in severe shrinkage, which make those guys even more valuable, whilst there's now this more elite class of wide receiver that perhaps there was, but then 3-4 years ago there wasn't this chasm of a huge gap at quarterback, and now there is. So from a 2022 standpoint, what is some tips for people starting in, and obviously you've got a book to sell, that we to like display the whole book here, but what are just some easy digestible takeaway tips for people who are going to engage in a startup in the next like few days, few weeks, etc.?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to go about it is to have a plan, right? And say, you know, so I'll do it a couple of different ways, right? Like I will actually come into a draft with a plan of, and I'll actually write it. You know, I write these things down so that way it keeps me honest. And it actually helps me get through my thoughts. But it'll say, hey, listen, if I go early quarterback, you know, what's that mean for quarterback 2? Right. And then, or if I wait on quarterback 1, right, what's it mean for quarterback? You know, what am I going to do for quarterback 1? What am I going to do for quarterback 2? Right. So, for example, if I'm at the end of the first round and it's a question of, all right, do I want to take, do I want to take a guy like Russell Wilson that early, or do I want to wait? Maybe I'll take a wide receiver there, and then, but okay, well, what's that sacrifice that I'm going to make at quarterback? Sort of how am I going to figure that out? Right. That's a tough thing to navigate, right? You kind of have to have a plan for that, right? So, because if you miss on quarterback, you can really be behind the 8 ball, and now you're chasing. Even if you have strengths at other places, like you really are subject to a lot of negative forces. You're swimming upstream if you're playing against guys that always, or other teams that have really good quarterbacks. You have to be excellent at everything else. And it's really tough to do. It's really competitive to do that, where it's just easier to be good at quarterback, and then you can make a lot. You can make mistakes and not totally bankrupt your team. So having those plans in place is, I think, something that's really interesting, right? I think that's really important. I think understanding what the trade up market is like. You know, I just talked about. Do you want to take your quarterback 1, or do you want to take wide receiver 1? Well, can you trade up for an even better quarterback, right? Can you trade in what the cost of that is? It's not something I've typically done a ton of in my career, but I did a lot of it last year. Really move up. Again, if it's not at the cost of, if you get elite quarterback that doesn't cost you future rookie picks, it's almost always worth doing in a startup draft. Is typically the trades that I've seen. They're almost always right to trade up if you're not giving up future picks. So that's something I think to think about. And then think about, kind of what your baselines want to be, right? If you're playing, if you're quarterback 1 is Patrick Mahomes, right? That can give you a little bit more flexibility on what your quarterback 2 is, or it gives you a lot more flexibility on what your quarterback 3 is, right? If your quarterback 1 is, Kirk Cousins, right? I think you have to rethink probably what your quarterback 3 plan is, right? So sort of understanding what your levels of comfort are with those and coming into your draft with a plan like that, I think makes a lot of sense. The other thing too is then look at, parts of the position that you feel comfortable with being meeting certain thresholds. So for example, do I feel confident in, who's at worst case scenario, what do I want my wide receiver 4 to look like? Right? Do I want that person to be a top 25 player? Am I fine with that person being Brandon Cooks? Right? Because those things are massively different in terms of how you go about building your team. Answering those questions in advance, and having some benchmarks to help you through that process make a lot of sense. This time of the calendar, the other thing I would say is don't make really specific bets, right? Because there's so much that can change between now and May, let alone now and August, and now and next December when fantasy playoffs are being decided. It's a lot that changes in there, right? So maintaining some flexibility. I wrote about this in the book, and you can go, you can go grab it and sort of see what I did. But in a league last year that I drafted about this time, maybe a little bit later in the calendar, I drafted Tom Brady as my quarterback 2, and I ended up with 4 future first round picks. Those things aren't things you would typically do on the same team, right? You wouldn't typically say, hey, I'm going to draft a win now quarterback and get a bunch of picks, because they conflict, right? Because if I'm not using the picks, I'm probably not preserving a window for a quarterback that I know probably is only a year or 2 left to help me. But what I was able to do is use those picks, right? That team build allowed me a lot of options, which was, I talk about, instead of being a productive struggler or win now team, build a team that can do either, right? Build a 2-way go, right? And it's not necessarily that my team, that I know I got my draft right, but once I know how my team turned out, right, once I sort of get that information revealed to me at the beginning of the season, then I'll have a lot more options to address that, right? Then I can understand the bet, right? The bet to make then, with a lot of flexible options, and maximize it then, rather than trying to say, hey, listen, I sharp shot these picks in February, which is almost impossible to do at a consistent basis. So understanding those things, right, and being flexible in your team build, and understanding that, long term, we don't know a ton right now. Go towards elite assets, right, and then leave yourself a lot of options, right? If you can pick up future picks, it doesn't necessarily mean you're tanking for this year. It just means that, hey, I can address need later on with liquid assets.
And so one of those sort of variables that you mentioned, we've got free agency a month from now, just under a month from now. And I tend to find that players are about to go into free agency tend to be valued a little bit lower, because there's that risk where they're going to end up. Where for you, in terms of free agency, are you willing to go, I'll buy at the discount, like because of their talent and production? And where do you just go, actually, do you know what? I don't want part of it. There's too much unknown. I'm just going to wash and just take what I do know and work on there. Like, how do you bake in the risk and decide that path? And I appreciate it's going to be different per draft based on how you start off, right? But I'm kind of curious how you'd approach it.
It's a really good question. I mean, so I think at different parts of your draft or at different parts of your team, you should be trying to accomplish different things, right? I think early in, on the top, if we were to talk about like a 27-man roster, right, just to make things easy, the first third, right, so the first 9 picks should be different aim than the next 9 or the 9 after that, right? Like you shouldn't be trying to do the entire same thing, right? The long-term bets that you're making in the top, 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds shouldn't be the same bets you're trying to make at the end of your draft, right? And you should be much more interested in investing in risk further down your roster, right? Because those things, the odds of success there are pretty low as it is, right? If you're taking a 20% shot, that's good at the 25th round, right? So you should be embracing risk there. And in the middle rounds, right? I think we overstate how likely it is guys hit, right? So a guy like Allen Robinson's a good example of this, right? Like all he's ever done has really been good, or he was hurt, or last year happened, right? That's basically, there's basically been 3 states of him, right? When he blew out his knee, when he wasn't very good last year, and he was basically good every other year, right? That's kind of what his status has been. Well, what do you think is going to be true? Well, I mean, if he's going to be valued at wide receiver 50, his upside's really high, right? If he's going to be wide receiver 20, do I want to make that investment off someone coming off of a down year where he probably wasn't hurt? And, he's heading into free agency and we don't necessarily know what the longevity is. Right? Those are different bets, right? At wide receiver 50, I'm all in. At wide receiver 20, like we could probably find more certainty, right? So I think those things matter, right? So, and then understanding, like, listen, if you take a bet, for example, like a guy like I'm taking not even free agency, but trying to take a speculative bet on free agency. So a guy like Dearness Johnson, for example, with Cleveland, Dearness Johnson was really good last year. He was PFF's top graded running back amongst qualifiers, and Kareem Hunt is owed $6.5 million. None of that's guaranteed, and they could potentially save all of that cutting him. Do I think he's going to get cut? I think there's a chance that he gets cut. Do I think, it's likely? I don't know. I doubt he comes back on the number that he's owed, right? So either they extend him, they restructure him or something. It seems like a lot to pay a backup running back that's not guaranteed. And so, all right, I take a shot on Dearness Johnson. Well, if Kareem Hunt comes back, like I can cut Dearness Johnson. If I've done it right, I haven't paid, if I pay a cost outside the top 60 of running backs for Dearness Johnson, that's a palette, right? And I could still hold him because I still think he's decent enough, depending on the format, he's decent enough to potentially, have down the line. He's probably one of the best running back 3s in the league. Yeah. If I'm doing that at running back 35, I don't love that as much. You know what I mean? So understanding that sort of the cost aspect of it, I think is a big deal. I was just recording a podcast actually before we started talking about just about that. And so having those, markers in mind about what you're paying, I think is something you have to, you should be willing to embrace risk down the line of your roster. Up at the top, you should be trying to avoid misses like that. So that should drive how you value guys at their costs.
I think that's such a great point because I think it's important this year to talk about free agency, maybe more than previous years, because there's so much, especially at the wide receiver position, there's so much talent,
right,
that's hitting free agency. It's an unprecedented amount of talent from guys like Michael Gallup, who don't get a lot of love, but whenever they play, they're reasonably productive. All right, OBJ's now got the injury, but Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there. This is quite an unprecedented class. So I feel it's an important point. As you say, you've got a value when you do your tiers, you've got a value where you put them and then go, you've got to bake risk in because Chris Godwin is not going to be the same Chris Godwin when he's not at Tampa. And spoiler alert, he's probably not going to remain in Tampa. The money's not there. I've been saying it for a year. I never thought he'd ever return. So he's not going to get as good a situation as he's had. So you're going to have to bake in when you do your tiers. Productivity is always key, but also you got to think about the situation. Devontae Adams is another one. Is his situation ever going to be as good as it is right now? If he goes elsewhere? I'd argue probably not. Whether someone like Allen Robinson, as you mentioned, his situation probably can't get much worse than it did last year.
Right.
So, as you say, if you're getting him at last year's finishing point, I'll buy a ton because he's got nowhere to go but up. And and I think that's what's key. So you've got to bake in the likelihood of their stick and twist as well. Like, where could they end up? Who's got the cash? Typically, the teams that have the cash aren't very good, more often than not. So the ones that will overpay, we look at Kenny Golladay and the Giants last year. It doesn't always work out. So, I think that's a key one. What about drafts, startup drafts, where you draft the rookie picks? I mean, I don't know if you do a ton of this or have done a ton of this, but I tend to find it's very difficult year on year to find that inflection point of where the first few rookie picks are worth pick whatever it is in a startup draft. Based on this year's class, where would you say sort of those early rookie picks and then back end of the first and then the second round picks, where would you kind of value them in a startup world?
So I haven't done enough rookie analysis yet to really comment thoroughly on the class. I know that everyone thinks the class is down. I think that's a common phenomenon in February. Once we start seeing guys run around in their shorts without shirts on at the combine, everyone changed their mind. So,
well, if there's a big if,
right, assuming they don't all hold out, but so I would just everyone likes to dog on the class until they see guys doing drills that don't matter, and then they want to change their mind. So just be cautious of that would sort of be my initial thing. I do think the class is probably down, and it's down in ways that I think are substantial. Right, you're not going to get it doesn't appear at this point you're going to see a run on top 10 quarterbacks. It doesn't appear at this point you're going to see like multiple first round running backs, for example, which would be a big deal. So those things are kind of the key things to make a class good. That's the quick and dirty of rookie drafts is you take those guys, and then you start taking the last first round wide receiver off the board. Like that's a pretty good success track. So if that's not going to be the case, right, the class is naturally going to be down. I've done some research in the past, and it has held out to be pretty true that right around pick 20 is where the 101 should go historically, or where it does go historically. And then basically the last pick of the first round is typically around pick 100. So I think that's, and it's a curve, right? It's not necessarily straight. It's about a round drop off. I think the 102 is like 32 overall, something like that. And then, it starts to flatten out a little bit as it goes along. But it is a steep drop, typically, because the 101 matters a lot more, right? You just think of some of the guys that were the 101 in the past, right? Saquon Barkley, right? Zeke, those guys like are really big difference over the 102s in their class. So generally though, I think that at this point of the year, especially later on, right? Especially, and I talked about something I call core assets and then I call non-core assets or contributing assets in my book, right? I have a whole hierarchy. I'll sort of help you through these processes, but as you sort of get on outside the top, call it 100 picks, right? There's a lot of uncertainty that happens. So if you're taking rookie picks or specific players, right, I think a lot of times the rookie pick is going to make more sense there because it's more liquid, right? It's more flexible. You shouldn't be taking a ton of super specific bets in February. And it gives you a lot of options, right? And one thing that I'm really attuned to this year more than any, because I made the mistake in the past, again, the Analytics of Dynasty ends up becoming a lot about don't make the mistakes that I made. And one of those is not having enough assets to address a situation like the Zeke situation a couple of years ago where he got suspended, or the Tyreek Hill situation where everyone thought he was never going to play football again and was selling dirt cheap, right? Having the picks to sort of in your pocket to do that with right now makes a lot of sense. In whatever that situation is. Watson was a good example of this, right? I had started to build my teams with ways to, hey, I need to be more flexible, right? I wanted picks in pocket because I could address these situations. And one thing we almost always see every year is one of the elite quarterbacks for some reason will drop in price, and you need to be able to address that. Right. So having a lot of pick flexibility matters. There will be a situation between now and August where someone drops in price. And if you can address that, if it can be a star player too, if you address that with picks, right, that you picked up now that would have been, insert situational wide receiver here, right? And instead of that, you took the picks that you can address one of these positions, or one of these drop in prices with for somebody along the way. That makes a ton of sense, right? A Devontae Adams holdout, for example, right? Like if that were to happen, if you have picks in your pocket and you can spend on that, right? That's the type of stuff that can really move the needle for you more than hitting on your individual player. So I think a lot in those, right? Trying to think of 2 or 3 steps ahead about what you could potentially use the picks on or what could come down the line. I think that makes a ton of sense. So generally speaking, I think I want to be pick heavy right now, even though by the time the rookie draft actually comes, maybe I'm pivoting off of those picks as we get closer towards the draft.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I think I always find it strange. You can acquire a lot of picks towards the end of a regular season from challengers who are quite happy to chuck them away to build a contender and to try and win in the playoffs, which makes a ton of sense, right? And push the chips all in, go Rams style. And then you get this lull around now where people are not willing to trade a lot of picks right now because they're hedging, because it's an incomplete picture, as you say. So I think, yeah, if you can acquire picks right now, I'm with you. But I imagine it's probably harder now than it will be come free agency time. I reckon free agency time is a great time to acquire picks because you can, especially if you can get ahead of the market, if you can start to anticipate moves, I think that's where you can make some real strides. I made huge strides last year by anticipating certain free agency moves, knowing who wasn't going to re-sign, being able to buy those players cheap, and then watching them pop off. You can do it every year, and you can get picks and swaps. So I tend to swap someone on my roster for said free agent and a pick. It's a good way of doing it, especially if it's a veteran. And I got Adam Thielen off a ton of rosters last year in that move. I was acquiring, I can't remember who it was now, but I got a free agent who was moving. I ended up picking a lot up of them with a pick for Thielen. Yeah, it's a great way to get rid of a veteran off your roster, maybe get your roster a little bit younger, and to get the picks to be fluid. So
totally.
Quick one on rebuilding, because I mentioned you've got this rebuilding guide, and as you said, you don't want these 3 or 4 years rebuilds. In terms of what are some high level tips? And again, let's not give away the book here. We want people to buy it. But what are some high level tips people can use that will help them? And then what's the most common mistake that people tend to make when it comes to rebuilding a roster? Because I tend to find there's a lot of people that listen to this pod that like to take orphan teams on because they love the challenge. They love the challenge of rebuilding, but perhaps sometimes get frustrated because they can't do it quick enough. So what are some things we can do to shorten that runway for them?
I mean, I'd start with I think that the mistake that people make is that they think it takes too long. And so again, I think the key is what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're trying to build this perfect team on paper, is that really practical for winning? Right. That would be the other thing that I would say. Do you want to put together this mega contender? Right. It's really hard to pull off. Right. So there's that. Like, they happen, but I think that they tend to happen more by accident, really, than they do by, and how many times, I'm still waddling through a team that I spent 4 years, right, of doing this rebuild thing that it has gone comedically bad, right? In terms of, I had Etienne, I had Akers, I had Dobbins, like I've had Barkley, like I've done all, like I've done the productive struggle team build. I've had all these wide receivers, like I've made great trades, and it just doesn't work out for a variety of comedic error type reasons. That stuff happens, right? And so I tend to very much, I like to operate in both worlds, right? Again, I call it the two-way go. Can you make decisions that can both make you productive and give you future outs, right? Give you future options. And so, one thing I thought last year that was a mistake was people rebuilding teams taking Trevor Lawrence. This is a terrible idea because there's so much value in trading him at that point. And you could have done a couple of things. You could have gotten more picks. You could have traded down, right? The biggest mistake that people make is thinking these rookies are going to be are a sure thing to happen, and that's not, right. There is no sure thing to happen, especially amongst rookies, especially amongst rookie quarterbacks. The surest thing to happen amongst rookie quarterbacks is that they perform randomly. That's what the surest thing historically has been amongst top 10 quarterbacks. It's that they perform randomly, right? So understanding those things, right? Trevor Lawrence wasn't a rebuilding tool, right? He was a piece to cash in a rebuild. And if you know, and I sort of detail in the book, and I think in the rebuilding guide as well, trades that I pivoted off of him, ended up getting multiple assets. And I had earned, I think, the 101. I might have earned the 103 in one of the leagues. And I had traded for a pick that became the 101 and another, but I was 2 non-playoff teams, worst 3 teams in the league. And I led the league in points, right, where I did those things. Right. And that was all of just pivoting off of that. Right. I wasn't going to wait for Trevor Lawrence to become good to be a productive team, right? I didn't have time for that. And I don't think that you should, right? Someone else wants to make that bet, let them make that bet. Let them pay you to make that, right? If they want to make this person is insulated in value bet, let them make the bet. You take the cash right now and let them make the bet. That's my take on it. And that's something that's really changed. And I think that has made me a lot better. And I think it's made a lot of my subscribers better. And a lot more profitable, if we're being totally honest. And so that's the thing that I think people do too much of, is build too far down the future. If you're sitting here right now, it's February 21st as we're recording, and your goal is not to compete in September of 2022, right? This upcoming September, you're doing it wrong. You're just doing it wrong, because there's so much uncertainty that happens, right? There's so much variance that happens. There's so much things that, and I had a team last year where I was trying to rebuild it and I couldn't get what I wanted. And it ended up being, a team that had Adams. It had Marquise Brown, right? It had Leonard Fournette, right? It had Kyler Murray, who overperformed. It had all of these. It had a bunch of. It had like 3. It had Mark Andrews. It had a whole bunch of guys that actually ended up overperforming. And the 5 or 6 guys that were pretty good on my team ended up carrying me to a really, really long way. They ended up, I ended up scoring the second most points. And the point of that story is to say that we don't know right now what's going to happen along the way. So don't rule out contending, right? Again, put some guardrails in place and say, listen, if I get it's week 4 and I'm 1-3 and I'm in the bottom quarter of points, right? Okay, then you're probably not going to contend this year. But there's so many things that can happen between now and then that ruling out contending in 2022 is just a mistake. And the other thing too is people want to get these super contending teams. I did some Twitter polls, and if you had the 20% shot to win the league, are you going to compete or are you going to rebuild? And like a quarter of people said they would rebuild. That's insane.
Yeah.
That is that's basically 2.5 times your odds to actually win the league, right? Of the random odds to win the league, right? And at 10%, you should be trying to compete, right? If your odds are 10% to win the league, that's 1 out of 10 in a 12-team league, right? That's actually you're at a significant advantage.
Yeah, you got an edge. You've got an edge.
Right. You have an edge, right? Just go for that, right? And that doesn't mean just haphazardly throwing picks around, but that definitely means don't ship it out. And I think at any given point, there's probably on average, probably in a league, there's probably only 9 teams truly competing. And there's probably a third of 3 other or a quarter of your teams in a 12-team league that aren't, right? And so if you're operating in that, you don't need to be an elite team. Like, you can turn a profit just doing that, right? And then you try and build from there. But I think people rule out contending too much. 100%. And they want to play that game. It's fine, but I'd rather win personally.
Especially as if you were let's say you stacked it up going into the season last year, you ranked 6th, 7th in points, projected points, right? Whatever that means. You're kind of the middle of the road and you're at this crossroads, right? If you ended up picking up Cordell Patterson off the waiver wire and a couple of other assets off the waiver wire, all of a sudden you go from 6th to 3rd or 2nd, you cash. It's like, and with a chance to win.
Right.
And that's where I'm with you. I just don't understand this logic, because the chaos, and we've seen it in the last 2 or 3 years, especially at running back now, the chaos, and maybe in the Dynasty League, it's a little bit harder, but there's always someone random. It's always someone random. Khalil Herbert for a couple of weeks. Cordell Patterson, no one had rostered. I don't care what anyone says, unless you're in the deepest league known to man. There's always 1 or 2 of those guys. Yes, you've got to hit. You've got to be lucky. It's not a guaranteed strategy, but if those chips come in and you're ready and you shove your fab in, you've got every chance of winning your league. It's just
right. Right. And
that's
the other
why,
thing
yeah,
too is like we lean into that, right? We lean into Cordero Patterson was a guy I've liked since I've been playing Dynasty for 10 years, and he was like one of my first rookie picks, right? Back when he came out. So I've liked him for a long time. I didn't expect this, but like being in on the Khalil Herbert idea, right? That's a great point. Like Darrell Williams, right? They're really cheap bets, and those are the type of asymmetric bets that can tilt your league. Right. And what you said too is right. Like if I had in a league where I detail it the book, I had Allen and Mahomes, and I had a couple of other pieces, right? I actually had Ridley. I had a lot of problems with the team. I had Ridley, right? A whole bunch of problems that ended up happening along the way. But the core thing that I had was Mahomes and Allen, right? And all things from there, I could figure out. But one of the pieces that happened that I came into the season absolutely withering on the vine at wide receiver. It was Ridley, it was Higgins, and it was Will Fuller were my top three guys. And I never got a snap out of Will Fuller. Right? I think if I got a game or whatever, I didn't get much out of Will Fuller. But I had Cordero Patterson. Right. And who would have thought that would have been the solution to a problem? Right. Like that would have been my wide receiver 2 on that season in that league. Who would have thought that? Right. But then I was, from there, I'm actually able to build out, right. And I can make deals. I can do trades and stuff. But there was like, if I had gone in the season, you'd be like, all right, you're screwed because you don't have a wide receiver 3. But like, I don't know. We can figure that out along the way. Right. That's a solvable problem. Right.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I would say to look at, if you're trying to contend or figure out contend, if you have 4 top 50 guys in your league, you're contending. Yeah, you should be contending. If you have 2 guys that are in the top 20, right, you should be contending, right? Just look at those benchmarks, and if that's true, right, and if you have 5 guys in the top 50, right, you're a contending team. The solution isn't to throw those guys back and say, I need to build for the future. No, it's to lean into those guys, right? And I think that's something that, if anything, I hope that people take from this.
100%. Love it. Quick one, just before I let you go. I know you've not done loads of rookie analysis yet. I'm sure you've done a little bit. I've done a little bit as well. Well, who are some guys just on the surface, and appreciate we haven't done the combine, the landing spots. We might not even get a combine this year if we believe reports that were coming out last night. Who are some of the guys you're tracking in those higher rookie picks that you think could have an impact? Just where we are right now.
Yeah, so I think I was looking at the data, the quarterback data just this past week, and Malik Willis is one for me that he's the type of player that it's really cost dependent. Do I want to spend 101 on that in a rookie draft? Maybe not, but I go back and I look at guys like Allen and Daniel Jones and some of these other, and heck, Mahomes, and like you go back at some of these other guys who had what would be deemed quote risky profiles, and with Willis, like you look at his ability to make big time throws, which is an actual stat that PFF tracks. PFF's my data provider. And like he's elite in that, in a really high end elite big time throw rate, which is kind of your difficult passes, right? Your big arm talent passes. That's something that is really intriguing. So him, depending on the cost, like he's one that I'm really interested to see, because I think the ceiling on that can be really high. So he's one that I'm really interested to see, where he goes, at what pick he goes in the NFL draft, and what that means for his rookie cost. And I think like sort of blending the two of those is going to be a big deal with a guy like him this year.
Love that. In terms of any wide receiver running backs you're keeping an eye on, is there anyone that you're a fanboy of?
I'll tell you, I don't know who the person is going to be yet, but I'll be a fan of whoever's the last wide receiver going, the last first round pick at wide receiver. So whoever that is probably going to be a value in rookie drafts. They'll probably be a value, right? That's a position that performs pretty randomly in terms of hitting for fantasy success within the first round. So when you start looking at those guys, kind of being in on the cheapest guy there. I tend not to build my rookie drafts through wide receivers, but I will absolutely take the last guy off the board. You've seen that with Ayuk. Tony's a good example of that. Being kind of in on the last guy of that range. I think that's a good way it's a cheap way to take an upside longevity play.
Well, I'm hoping this year it is Drake London. That's the guy who I think could be that guy, and think he will be a great asset into the NFL. Kind of a bit like a Mike Evans, dominating the air, loving the pieces. Think he could be someone special if he lands on the right team. And if you're picking late in the first round, you're a good team, so you're going to be a good piece. Love that. Tell everyone, Jordan, where they can buy the book, where they can interact with you, and get to know more of this sort of fountain of knowledge that they can subscribe to and get from you.
Yeah, you can go get the book, analyticsofdynasty.com. It comes as a PDF version. You get it right in your inbox. Get reading it. Get ready, and start making. Increasing the value in your trades, increasing the value of your dynasty teams right away by implementing it. So you can go do all that. And again, it has analytics in the title, but don't be super scared of it. It's not too analytically dense. I have an editor that works with me that sort of makes sure that we don't do that in terms of killing people with the math and stuff. So that process is good. So you could go ahead and check that out at analyticsdynasty.com. I'm the co-host of the Football Guys podcast, Football Guys Dynasty show with my co-host Chad Parsons. You can find that wherever you get your Football Guys podcast. And then analyticsdynasty.com, we have a yearly subscription you can go check out. I do a podcast every day that I release. We've released 388 podcasts last year. And we have a trade database. We've got my Dynasty tiers, which I'm in the process of just actually finishing up a series of podcasts on. So you can go ahead and find all of that. We have a group me chat that the sun never sets. We've got people all over the world in our group me chat, constantly talking Dynasty and different strategies. So you can find that, check that all out at analyticsofdynasty.com.
Absolutely. And you can find Jordan at McNamara Dynasty on Twitter. It's a good follow. He does share some excellent pieces on there, so make sure you do that. Do check out the book. I highly recommend it. I'm going to put a link in the show notes as well, so you can find it. Jordan, as always, thank you so much for coming on and blessing us with some wisdom. I know that a lot of people are going to get a lot of use out of this, and hopefully then go on and buy the book. I like I said, I buy it every year, and I highly recommend it. I actually get mine printed out as well. I'm old-fashioned like that, to make notes in the margin, then go back to them. So that's a good way. I also find that helps with the graphics, because otherwise what I do is I put it on my Kindle, and sometimes some of the graphics are a little bit dark. So then if I print them out, I can see them a little bit better, because I like to have that information as I go.
My wife printed them all out for me a couple years ago. She gave me like 5 copies of each one of them, and I was like, "It's great. They've all got notes in them." Like,
see if I can reach it. I might not be able to.
Oh, I actually don't have this year's though. I don't have this year's ones printed yet. I just realized that. But yeah, this is the first one.
I was just checking. No, that's not it. That is something completely different. I was hoping I had it in reach. This is what happens when you move.
It's all good.
I do have it in my drawer somewhere behind me. I was hoping to reach it, and instead I pulled out something completely different. But no, do recommend it. Do go out and get it. Jordan, thank you so much for joining me. Rush Nation, I think you agree this is a very knowledgeable podcast. We've all got a little bit smarter listening to Jordan for the last hour. So do give him some love, and do follow him. And until next week, we'll be back with another amazing guest. Don't forget, as always, keep rushing.